If you're not trying new things, that's perhaps the riskiest thing of all, because you're letting initiatives just kind of repeat and go flat. And we've had those conversations. We've had people tell us this with resources and budgets to fund the culture mission. We've had them say, we're seeing a decline in this, or we're seeing a decline in this program or this initiative or this event that we do every year, whatever the case may be. If things get stale, just like anything else, engagement is at risk there.
Welcome to the official CultureCon podcast, where we explore how work actually works.
We're your hosts, Zach Blumenfeld
and Nick Lombardino.
Whether you're leading a team, shaping culture, or just passionate about making work more meaningful, you're in the right place.
Each episode will bring you stories, insights, and bold ideas from people who are building better workplaces and better work experiences.
The official CultureCon podcast starts now.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the official CultureCon podcast. We're here with our friends Pete and Greg from Culture Shape for their third and final episode of this mini-series. And today we're going to unpack something that's often overlooked, but hugely important. It's de-risking your culture program. It's not a phrase that you really hear that often, but it's really a smart way to frame the stakes of culture work. So, Greg, where do you recommend that teams start with this?
Yeah, this is a great topic. There is lots of things you can do to be removing risk from your culture operations. So this episode, maybe something like a checklist, you can be on top of while you're listening and go through them, start to assess, what do we have a handle on inside our organization already, and which ones have we not fully thought through yet, or what do we need to plan to get on top of? So I think the best starting point, the fundamental way to de-risk your culture program is what we love is always talked about, culture signals. So diving a bit deeper into, taking a close look at everything you're doing now and having a way to identify weak culture signals versus strong ones. Obviously, your weak signals are going to pose the biggest risk to undermine your culture budget, building efforts, and spend. Weak signals, you can check out that episode on culture signals on the CultureCon podcast. But weak signals are those low impact culture initiatives that take up your culture budget, your time, your attention, your energy, and don't move the needle on culture. And you want to be able to build a rolling plan covering your next 12 months of signals, funding less of the, weak signals and more of the stronger ones.
Yeah, I really like that framing. And so many culture teams are constantly doing something, but without really stepping back, taking a high level look and, asking, are these efforts really moving the needle, or is it just filling something on a calendar or checking a box? And I know you touched on culture signals, like you said in the last episode. We'll link to that in the show notes, but where should teams go from there once they've identified those strong and those weak culture signals?
Yeah, I think it's more, first off, build in a lot of low-cost signals into your plan, as many as you can. Come behind your strongest programs with supporting communication materials, whether it's videos, emails, quick surveys, signage. And those things can get a bad rap because people say culture isn't a poster on the wall, and it isn't, but visual reminders that our posters or videos or tangibles are effective, not when they're the extent of your culture efforts, but when they're reinforcing the bigger, more organized, ongoing, approach and movement you have. And adding low cost, culture signals in your program is a must. These are pretty much no risk spends. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do once you have that framework.
Yeah, and I think when you have signals, or what your strong signals plan is going to be, we always talk about just plot that on the culture wheel. We always talk about use a culture wheel. It's a great risk reduction tool because number one, it's a simple calendar. It's literally a 12-month calendar, and you put your strongest signals on there so everyone on the culture teams know what you're working on, and you share that and visualize that internally around the company. So everyone who's relying on the culture team or stakeholders in culture programs also know what's being rolled out, what's ahead, what's coming. And it becomes your go-to visual for communication, really, about your entire program. So if you have a wheel and you keep it updated, now you've got like a simple tool, a simple visual to keep everyone on track. And that concept alone is going to go a long way to reduce risk of errors, risk of things slipping through the crack, risk of misunderstanding because communication wasn't there. So I think that's an easy fundamental.
Yeah, visualization seems to be key in all this. And getting back to what you said, Greg, it's true. I feel like some of the printed materials often get a bad rap because of, in situations where that's like the extent of your culture efforts, or when these materials aren't authentically being lived out within the organization, like having the values on the wall. If somebody walks past it and looks at it and is like, we don't do this, like, then it all just falls apart. But there is value to having those types of printed materials. From what Pete was just talking about, it's like the visualization, the reinforcement, the types of touch points and signals that can point towards, these broader purpose-driven behaviors. So I think that makes total sense. And the culture wheel really acts like both a planning tool and a communication tool. And it's pretty rare to see something do both of those things really well. So are there like other practical moves teams can make to strengthen their program without taking on a lot of new risk?
For reducing risk, probably the top priority is to get your company leader, your CEO, your president involved in what you're doing and get them out in front of people. And so we just call that a president's message, just literally getting your president, your CEO to film themselves. It can be on their phone, and sending a message specifically about culture directly out to teams, the entire employee base, or as wide an employee population as possible, obviously. And you, as the people and culture champion, would obviously prep them and direct them on that messaging so that they know the message that they want to be conveying. You guys have worked together on that. And it's a great thing to do, because obviously if a president or CEO is kind of conspicuous by their absence, not really front and center in this kind of messaging, it's hard to make it land for the wider audience, no matter what kind of initiatives you've got planned for the year. So you really do need to get that support in place. And just another tip on that, a really good thing to talk about is someone in that position can talk about how culture aligns with the business strategy, or maybe a specific business objective for that quarter or for that year. So I would say that's a major risk reduction strategy for your culture program.
We want to give a quick thank you to our friends at Culture Shape. They're really helping people and culture leaders design and deliver higher impact programs through a single source.
Yeah, and one of the things I love is their Culture Wheel. It's a 12-month visual calendar that makes it easier to plan, organize, and communicate culture programs across the whole organization. It's a simple way to get stronger buy-in and support.
And right now we got a really cool promotion for our CultureCon podcast listeners. You can get 50% off a one-on-one 4-week online consulting program with Pete Savage, Culture Shape's CEO. These spots are limited, so if you're interested, head to cultureshape.co/CultureCon to grab your place.
I really love that president's message idea. It really sparked like a couple core memories from my career. Couple companies that I worked for in the past, and they did something very similar, and it just felt like really authentic. It wasn't like fake and scripted. It felt like the CEO was giving a message of what's going on, culture initiatives, how that's tying directly to business strategy. And it almost like humanized the CEO and the president of the company. Like, you're able to know that person on a more personal level, even though it's just a message you're getting to your email, a video message. And I felt connected to not only the CEO, but the company, because of how relatable those messages were. And it's really amazing how much of an impact a 60-second message or 5-minute message even can make when it's tied to your culture. Like that was probably 10 years ago, and I still remember those videos, getting them in my inbox. But I also imagine that not every team feels comfortable asking their execs to get involved at that level. And what do you think, or why do you think that hesitation exists?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. It depends on the company. You might have a culture team that is far too far removed, let's say, in say the corporate hierarchy from the executive suite, from having an audience with the CEO, for example. So there may be a real gap, or maybe a perceived gap in accessibility to make that invitation and have that conversation. That's something that has to be bridged, though. So you need to look for allies in having those conversations. Maybe your boss or manager can help bring that to the forefront so that that can take place. But even if in another company, maybe it is run by a chief people officer or someone at the VP exec level, and they do have that relationship, say with the president or CEO. But even then, it can be perceived as, well, if I'm the chief people officer, this is really sort of my responsibility. This is kind of my bag to do this. So there might be some hesitation to just really reach out and involve the figurehead of the company in sort of in the trenches messaging. But again, whatever the case may be that is preventing people from doing that or being hesitant on it, you just have to do it, because back to reducing risk, it's just too risky to leave the company leadership out of that conversation. Again, it kind of unnecessarily undermines all the other programming that you're planning to do if you don't have that visible endorsement from the leadership of the company. And so, if that's an issue, I think strategize on how to get that done. And don't be afraid to just ask. But getting back to more of the planning type approaches we've been recommending and suggesting for culture programming, the more you've got your plan thought through, the more strategic thinking you've put into it, with things like vetting weak culture signals out, hedging more bets on strong culture signals. The more you have your game dialed in, the more confidence, the easier that conversation with the leadership of the company is going to be to help bring them on side. They're going to feel like you've got your game plan down, and you're going to inspire confidence in them wanting to do this, which is super important. That relationship is super important.
I want to talk about this one a little bit more, because this is kind of is the lifeblood of a lot of culture programs. I mean, that's one of the strategies. We're getting ahead of that is super important. So before you go to your exec team, you really want to have these things in place, like knowing your strong signals, budget allocation, the why and how cultures, your efforts tie into our fundamental values and our strategy, a well thought out 12-month culture wheel with everything, detailed out, work back schedules, a really clear plan. And this is to share and talk about. If it's not with the CEO, it's with the next level. It could be with whoever's cutting the check for the budget for the culture team or wherever. So when you get the execs here for 10 or 15 minutes, you can take them through this, and boom, they know what you're on top of. You have a plan. They can get, involved and really endorse the culture you're working on. And the reason is because you've given them something operationally to really understand and have confidence in, loaded with the culture teams, what they're working on.
That's so important. The idea of giving executives something operational to respond to, I think is critical. And you called this out, Pete and Greg. It's like, it's not just about getting executive buy-in. I think we hear that term a lot, executive buy-in, executive buy-in. It's really about earning confidence, which I think is just a kind of a cool reframing of it. So, once that's in place, once you have kind of this level of involvement and organization in the beginning, like, how do you recommend teams keep evolving their programs and continue to remove risk as time goes on?
Yeah, these are just a lot of simple rules. When you're that organized, you already have a framework from which to start gathering feedback, and that's key. So you might have a small employee committee, or you might go to a wider, employee base and actively ask for feedback about culture, you know, face to face, or however you're going to do that, saying, "Hey, we've done some initiatives lately. Say it's a recognition or a communication piece. What did you think of it? We sent out some useful culture tools. Are you using them? Are they making life easier for you? What do you think of them?" That kind of thing. When you can be talking about culture, gathering feedback, you're going to use that feedback to do more of what works and less of what doesn't, meaning you're basically optimizing the payback of your spend on an ongoing basis and removing risk continuously. So, like, all these methods of listening and collecting feedback can be super simple things, cheap, cheerful surveys, or they could be more elaborate efforts to collect data and score for a measure of culture, or they could be qualitative in things like, town halls. These town halls and messages from, the higher ups are super important. Simple video calls. There's lots of ways to do it. And this isn't, you don't have to do this every week or month. Like, a few times a year, and you'll get a gauge and a barometer on what you're doing is right and wrong.
More and more we're seeing just on a personality level, like you guys are probably noticing it as well, like at the CultureCon events. It's like more and more people are embracing the idea that if we're the people in culture champions, we got to get out there in front of people inside organizations. And maybe that's not the personality we brought into the role, but that's kind of what the role requires. And so maybe that's the role you grow into playing, or maybe, you support someone else on the team that does that. But the idea of, we're talking about ideas like inviting the executive to come and get on board, looking at what your plans are. Greg just went through a bunch of ways, asking for feedback. You're really putting yourself out there, and that's part and parcel of this role. And I think that's a exciting thing to embrace, really.
Yeah, and with culture being so ingrained in every aspect of your business, it really is the DNA of your organization. And what I love about what you're talking about is it just becomes this continuous cycle. And the more structured you are, the easier it becomes to change, pivot, listen, adapt. And I think from an executive level, like prove the value of these culture initiatives. And that data, even if it's simple, qualitative, it really does help culture earn a seat at the table and be a part of that conversation. And I know we're almost at time here, but there's been so many good tips and tricks that I think are really actionable and easy to try out at our community's organizations. But any quick last tips we can squeeze in before we wrap up this episode?
I think still on the theme of reducing risk, I think you've got to be experimental. You've got to bring that willingness to experiment. I mean, beyond willingness, an eagerness really to experiment. You have to be willing to try new programs, new approaches, even if it's just new ways of thinking about culture planning and operating. If you're not trying new things, that's perhaps the riskiest thing of all, because you're letting initiatives just kind of repeat and go flat. And we've had those conversations. We've had people tell us this. We've had, people in, VP and culture role, coordinator level, executive level, inside organizations with resources and budgets to fund the culture mission. We've had them say, we're seeing a decline in this, or we're seeing a decline in this program or this initiative or this event that we do every year, whatever the case may be. If things get stale, just like anything else, engagement is at risk there. So just bringing the curiosity and the willingness to experiment, evaluating for new ideas. If you keep your radar up for new ideas, new things to do, and to try, things like CultureCon are great for that, because you get to have hundreds of conversations about what other people are doing. Bringing that attitude, this culture, the people in culture role, this can be one of the most creative roles inside a company. You look at marketing departments, R&D departments in some companies, they're having a ball because they get to bring their personality, their ingenuity, their creativity, their leadership, their imagination to the job. And there's no reason why you can't bring that level of creativity and ambition into your people and culture role. And so being willingness to just explore and try new things, I think is a major way to not only enjoy your job more and probably have a better impact, but reduce those risk factors, because you're always looking for something that's sustainable, that's fresh, that's going to help with engagement, help with the impact, help with the particular business initiative or culture initiative that you're trying to, light a fire under.
That's it, man. That's it. That's such a strong way to end the episode and really this broader mini series with you. So thank you for staying away from theory and getting so much into practical application. So much of what you shared, these are actionable, tested strategies that any culture leader can start applying right away. So we love that, practical over theoretical. And of course, to all the listeners, we highly recommend checking out the Culture Wheel Playbook. If you want to dive deeper, we're going to have a link to that in the show notes. So Pete, Greg, thank you for sharing your expertise with our community. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Always
Thanks,
a
Nick
pleasure.
and
Thank
Zach.
you, guys.
Yeah.
That's a wrap on this episode of the official CultureCon podcast.
If you got something out of it, share it with a friend, a teammate, or a fellow culture geek.
And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.
And if you want more ways to stay connected and inspired, check out our upcoming events page for a full listing of webinars, workshops, and conferences.
You'll find the link in the show notes, and we'd love to welcome you to a CultureCon event soon.
Until next time,